Good morning, ladies. How are you?
Good
Good
morning.
morning. Good.
So, we have a guest with us this morning, and Monica Cline, and I'm going to let Julia give our introductions here, and then we're going to hear a little bit more from Monica. So, welcome, everybody. Good morning, and happy Hump Day.
Oh, good morning, Monica. I am so excited to have you on this morning. Monica and I know her cousin. Her cousin said, "You have got to meet my cousin, Monica." And so she was right. We absolutely had to meet years ago. And I've had Monica come up to Oklahoma to spend a conference with me and teach my women that were at my pregnancy center
Mhm.
and let them know what's going on because she has got such a rich history. And Monica, I'm going to kind of just turn it over to you and let you give your background
Sure.
and how you went from your background into your ministry that you have now. It takes a family. So,
Sure. Okay. Well, thank you for having me on, and it's good to see you again, Julia, and to meet you,
yeah.
Jenny. So my past. Wow. Straight out of college, I did what most, I think, what a lot of kids in their 20s want to do, which is, you want to go save the world. You want to be a part of doing something good in your community, in your country. And I was really driven by compassion. And at the time, the HIV epidemic was at the forefront of our minds. It was in the 90s.
Mm.
That's 1990s for all the younger people out there. That's how old I am. And so what I ended up doing to impact the world in a positive way, not having a Christian background. I was definitely a liberal, although I didn't use that terminology to describe myself, but I very much was molded by the university that I attended, the University of Texas at Austin. And I decided to volunteer, and then was quickly hired at a gay organization that had a government funded program, an HIV prevention program that was going out into marginalized communities that were greatly affected by HIV. And that meant people of color, Hispanic, African American, and a program for men who have sex with men. And I wanted to do my part. I wanted to help the marginalized. I wanted to help populations of people that I believed were being ignored by other people. And so I just kind of really thought that I was doing the compassionate thing. And there is a noble cause behind that, right? You do want to help stop the spread of a disease like HIV. What I didn't realize is what I was really stepping into, what kind of worldview was utilized to quote unquote really help the community. And that was the world of comprehensive sex education. And comprehensive sex education historically started really probably really with Margaret Sanger doing prescribing birth control even before it was legal, but then
Right.
spreading the word of using birth control across the nation and in marginalized communities. We all know that she was also a eugenicist, so she believed in eugenics. So she was trying to get rid of these marginalized communities because she found them to be undesirable. And she used comprehensive sex education. And then we saw in the 70s that it began to be funded somewhat by the government to combat other STDs. HIV wasn't an STD that anyone had seen yet. And so, what the nurses saw in the 70s is as they were teaching comprehensive sex education in the community, STD rates were actually increasing. So, even 10 years later, they're realizing we're not curbing, we're not actually stopping the spread of STDs, they're increasing. Now, by the time HIV came around in the 80s and 90s, we see that the government starts heavily funding comprehensive sex education. And of course, it's for HIV prevention. So that's where we see the government really funding that. The CDC is really backing this with a lot of money. And once again, we're seeing more sex outside of marriage, we're seeing more infection. And in my work with women of color, but also my work with my teammates, the ones who were actually the men who were reaching out to other men who were having sex with men. They were really admitting that they still weren't using condoms. So this comprehensive sex education, that the condom is the answer. Really, these marginalized populations, especially the gay population, was saying it's inevitable. We're going to get this disease anyway. They just didn't do it. And that's what we're still seeing today with PrEP, a medication that's supposed to keep you from getting the HIV virus. It really is opening up again for the culture to not use condoms. They're still being infected with other STDs, maybe not HIV because of PrEP. And so what we're seeing is comprehensive sex education isn't actually improving health. If anything, is increasing high-risk sexual behavior in children and in adults. And of course, you heard me say the refer to children, and that's because, as we know today, the general public knows today that comprehensive sex education is being taught very aggressively to children. Now, I've been speaking out against this for over a decade because I was a part of that movement in the 90s. I was trained by the gay community, and I was also trained by Planned Parenthood. And my training with Planned Parenthood was specifically on how to teach children comprehensive sex education, because it is their belief. And again, this goes back in history to Alfred Kinsey in the 40s, around the same time as Margaret Sanger. This very depraved belief that children are sexual from birth, just because they have sexual organs, just because God created their bodies to have sexual organs and nerve endings in their sexual organs, doesn't mean that children should be stimulated sexually. It doesn't mean that children should become sexually active by any means. And it certainly doesn't mean that any adult should try to be sexual with a child. I know all of that is shocking probably to your hearers right now, to even hear someone say that, that this is happening, but it is happening. And It was all because of the false, fraudulent research of Alfred Kinsey, which was really, when you read his book, which you can get on eBay, I don't know that Amazon sells it or not, but he has proof in there of what he did. Looking for sexual climax in infants and children over 24-hour periods. He got that from pedophiles who were reporting back to him. And this was all documented in his books in the 40s. And that's where the culture got this belief that children are sexual from birth. Therefore, we should be teaching them to have sex. Therefore, we should teach them to masturbate. And this is why we're seeing what we're seeing today. Now, I was fighting this, like I said, decade ago or more, and no one wanted to hear it because it was too shocking. No one wanted to hear it because it was really concentrated in communities that were so impoverished that they were not going to tell or complain to the government or to anyone that it was happening. But now we're seeing that they have become so prolific in their education. We're seeing that, what Planned Parenthood being the largest provider of sex education in the world, really, and in our country, and all the money behind it, that it's not being hidden anymore. We're seeing it exploding from our movies to children's cartoons, in our education system, everywhere, even our pediatricians. And it's a cultural change away from our God-given principles. And it is absolute depravity, and it is an attack to kill, steal, and destroy our children. Why the children? Well, because they're vulnerable. Why the children? Well, because they don't know that they need to speak up for themselves. They don't have that strength within them to do that. Why the children? Because as one of the largest sex ed providers also is SECUS, their motto is actually sex education for social change. Why the children? Because when they can change the children, when they can change the values, beliefs, and behaviors of children, then they are changing the future generation and the future leaders of this country. And as what we're seeing is this kind of education absolutely destroys the emotional, mental, spiritual, and physical health of our children. And so really they are creating generations of children who are vulnerable, who are broken, who are fragmented, and they won't be able to lead in the future. But they will be much more easily controllable by an out-of-hand government, which we're seeing today is very much moving towards socialism and communism. And so
Right.
that's really, I'm kind of giving you a synopsis of all of that. Not necessarily my entire history in sex education, but I did do that for over 10 years until I became a Christian. And then God slowly started to take the scales off my eyes and help me to see that this education was actually harming the communities in the communities that I was wanting to help, the communities that I felt compassion towards. And that included the gay community, that included the transgender community. I saw them slowly destroy themselves. And so when I began to see that, I knew I couldn't be in that kind of work anymore. And I removed myself from that. And I started to blow the whistle, mainly with pro-life groups, because what people need to understand is that sex education is the marketing tool for abortion.
Right.
It is how they convince generations of people to utilize abortion. And all of that is dollar signs for Planned Parenthood. If you were to look at Planned Parenthood's annual budget, every single year, you will see that most of their money, the number one line item of money spent is for medical services, which is their abortions. The second line item that they spend most of the money on is called education, which is their sex education. But you can really rename that to be marketing. So as they're marketing the behavior and the beliefs of comprehensive sex education, what you're really doing is you're teaching children how to dehumanize themselves by objectifying each other through sex outside of marriage. And once that child, and not just that, but now they're also teaching our children that their sexual orientation is fluid, that their gender is fluid. So they're completely dehumanizing and fragmenting our children to the point that by the time they do find themselves pregnant, it's much easier for them to dehumanize that preborn child through abortion. And so we have this vicious cycle of dehumanization through this type of education.
Right. You know, talking about the dehumanization of the babies in the womb, that is one of the things that, and this may have come from you, that, you know, in our just regular conversation in America, even Christians will say they're expecting a baby. No, that is a baby. You're not expecting a baby. That is a baby. And they'll say things like, I can't wait to meet my baby. It's like your baby is right there. You've been talking to that baby. That is a baby. And it's the mindset that that's not a baby until birth. And that is a baby, you know. And but it is just part of the dehumanization, and our language and our conversation, the whole, which is what they're trying to change. And they did it like drinking from a fire hydrant during COVID, which was, you know, just a whole nother level of wrong thinking and anti-biblical thinking.
Right.
But so tell me a little bit about your transition from when you got out of there, well, became a Christian, got out of there, got the scales off your eyes, and how do you address these things? How do we get the message to people in schools and the history, because they're just like, no, I have to do this because we get federal money, you know. And it's one of the things you just said about Planned Parenthood being the largest teacher of sex ed. Tell me a little bit more about that. And do they change their name for red states, or how does that work?
Um, well, it's not necessarily that they changed their name. You know, they are the largest provider of sex education. They get a lot of funding. SECUS also receives a lot of funding. Advocates for Youth has been funded by the CDC for many, many years. The CDC actually contracts with Advocates for Youth to inform them about adolescent health. Okay, so Advocates for Youth actually came out of Planned Parenthood, and so there's several organizations that have spawned from Planned Parenthood. So I call them the spawn. You know, these are the children, the spawn of Planned Parenthood. SECUS was the spawn of Planned Parenthood with Mary Calderon. Advocates for Youth, same thing. Advocates for Youth then created a maze, and so really we see all of this trickling out of Planned Parenthood. And Planned Parenthood, you know, the leader in comprehensive sex education has their spawn, and then other organizations that agree with them. And they've all come together to create the National Sex Education Standards. That's the NSES. And you can go to SECUS and look those up. And that's what informs them. They have these standards for sex education, which includes the belief that children are sexual from birth. And that philosophy, that worldview is what informs the sex education. So even if Planned Parenthood didn't create the curriculum at your school, if it is following the National Sex Education Standards, or if it is following the Comprehensive Sex Education, which that's what it is, it's all based on those standards, then you have the same kind of education that Planned Parenthood is peddling. But Planned Parenthood also earns a lot of money internationally with the World Health Organization, with the UN, going into foreign countries, not only pushing comprehensive sex education, but abortion as well. And so they are what seemingly a Goliath, but in comparison to our God, absolutely not.
Right.
Now, one of the things that you mentioned is schools, you know, that they want the federal money. Well, this is all about, what is your worldview? Are you motivated by money, or are you motivated by God's principles to do what is right for humanity and by children? You know, of all of humanity, can we not have love and compassion and a natural desire to protect children? Well, we do when we are worshiping God. But if you worship money, then you don't care.
Right.
And so your listeners are probably going to think, well, she's being really harsh about education. Well, public education is not based on God's principles. John Dewey formed government-run public education as a socialist. He was he was not able to convince Americans to allow the government to educate their children, because essentially they were homeschooling, or they were, you know, schooling within the church or at home. And so he went away to, I believe it was Sweden. I may be wrong about that. And really, you can read this history in the Crimes of the Educators by Alex Newman. But then he comes back to America with a lot of new tools, and he's able to form taxpayer-funded government education, public school. And it was founded on socialism. And so really what we're seeing in our public education system is that it is not founded on godly principles. It is founded on socialism, which is anti-God. Socialism leads to communism. It's kind of like the first step to communism. And when you read the Communist Manifesto, you see that Karl Marx very explicitly hates God. He literally says that in the Communist Manifesto. He does not want private education. He does not want children educated at home. He does not like the private family. You can read this yourself in the Communist Manifesto. And his exact quote in the Communist Manifesto is, abolish family.
Right.
Literally, abolish family. And he also said, in order to abolish the family, or the private family, how dare parents educate children and give children their beliefs and their religious beliefs and all of that, and their morality. And he said, the way we get rid of the family is to get rid of their God. Why? Because he knows that God is powerful. And he knows that when God informs the family, that family is strong. Those parents protect their children, and those children grow up with the principles and the values and the morality that God has taught the parents, and the parents have then passed on to the children. And so the whole point of socialism and communism is to eradicate God, to change the culture from worshiping God to worshiping themselves, worshiping money, worshiping, whatever, anything but God. And so that's what we're seeing. So when I see public education and they're more motivated to bring in programs that deteriorate the family, that they don't want to hear from parents, that they purposely pass policies, boards pass policies so that parents can't speak at board meetings. When they refuse to tell parents what programs they have and the details of those programs, when they're hiding and convincing the children that they're an opposite gender and they don't tell parents what's going on.
Right.
All of that is anti-family. It is also anti-God. And we have, as Christians, have got to start being truthful about that. And what the public education system is doing is very similar to what I was taught in public health and public sex education. And that is that parents are uneducated, parents are ill-equipped, parents are neglectful, parents are selfish, and the government, i.e. teachers, nurses, need to intervene for the sake of the child.
Well, because they know better.
Because they know better. Because they
know better than parents, right?
Yeah, they know better than parents, and especially they know better than the Christian parent. Because those, and this is me quoting them, those ridiculous, hateful Christian parents. Now, how do they change the children from believing what their parents have believed and taught them about God to believing socialism or an anti-God theology? And it's very simple. They use counseling techniques. And so for me, when I see all this money going towards mental health, it's because they're using the same mental health approaches that we use in sex education, that we use in the abortion industry, to help us create a bond with that person, even children, so that they trust us and not their parents. And I hate to say it, but I was one of the #1 trainers on helping clinicians form those bonds with their clients. And it's using the same techniques that we see for Carl Rogers in psychology. He's a humanist, and he believed that, as a humanist, that all people are good, and that basically it's relativism. And so we're to just listen to that person without judgment and then lead them towards those behaviors. And so what Planned Parenthood does is they create that bond. They listen to you. They let the kids know, we're not going to judge you. You have sexual feelings. There's nothing wrong with that. It's actually also very similar to how Satan spoke to Eve in the Garden of Eden. I understand you. Don't you want knowledge? Do you really? And he really manipulated her. Well, that's what they're doing to the children. Your parents don't understand. And, they're an older generation, so they don't understand homosexuality. They don't have the compassion for the transgender people that you can. Their religion, I'm sure they think their religion is good, but they just don't understand. It's a very old-fashioned way of looking at things. So they don't entirely demonize the parent, but they start to bond with the child and make the child believe that somehow they are even wiser and more compassionate than their Christian parent. And these are ways that you can be compassionate here at school and have love and acceptance for the transgender friend or the homosexual friend, and perhaps your own feelings of being the opposite gender. And so they start planting all these seeds in the child through the guise of compassion. And slowly start to create a division between that parent and the child.
So, Monica, I'm going to interrupt you for just a second because I wanted to ask you a couple of questions based on, what you've already mentioned today. So I put up a screenshot here just a second ago, which is my favorite book, and not that you have to order it on Amazon, but this is The Naked Communist. And I just urge everybody to get a copy of this and read it because as you were talking about, Monica, this is communist. The whole, if you literally sit down and go over the Communist Manifesto, which Cleon Skousen explains one after the other in the Naked Communist, we've really hit all of them at this point. And one of them definitely is, what you've been talking about is getting parents. So it's the destruction of the family. I mean, it's destruction of God and then destruction of the family, because once we take those two pillars away, the whole house falls down.
Absolutely.
And they know that, and people are easily led, and they can basically, the government can basically tell anybody anything. And so my question is, when you were involved in this training, did you get the sense that these people were communist and that they knew what they were doing, they were perpetrating this crap? Or do you feel like that it's kind of the useful idiot? Stalin used to call, if you weren't a communist and, you believed in what the communists were doing to a point, he could use you, and you were a useful idiot to him. So do you believe that these people you worked with were useful idiots, or do you believe they actually understood what they were doing?
I believe that the leaders at the top definitely know what they're doing. I know a good friend of mine who was a state rep here in Texas, Molly White. She's long been a pro-life speaker, has gone to the UN quite often. And she's actually the first to have given me the Humanist Manifesto. And I don't have proof of this, but she did say that she had learned that the higher ups of Planned Parenthood are all given a copy of the Humanist Manifesto. And that's very, and I would say that is their philosophy. Everything that I've spoken about today and how I was trained is very much humanism, and very much then which is it's hard for me, because I'm not an expert necessarily in this, but I believe it's that movement from humanism, socialism, and full out communism. And so I would say that the leaders knew that, and I believe that philosophy and that worldview is being taught to the workers. Now, I was that young person coming in with just my eyes of, I want to help people, and they then groomed me to believe these things. One of the first things that they taught me about children, to me, sounded inappropriate. It sounded abusive to children, and that children really needed to be rescued from sexual activity, because it sounded like they were being abused to me. Planned Parenthood quickly corrected me and let me know that children were consenting to sex and that they were not being abused, and that this was their right because they're sexual from birth. And so that was part of the grooming process, is to basically deconstruct me so that I don't believe children are being abused, but instead that they have a right to become sexually active, even if the parent doesn't agree with that. And because they don't agree with that, then we need to keep secrets from parents. And so that is all the destruction of the family. And that is exactly why I started It Takes a Family. So once I left that industry and I asked God, how did I even learn these things? Like, how was I deconstructed? Not that I used that word back then. How did this happen? And he started to show me. He showed me about Alfred Kinsey. He reminded me that Planned Parenthood consistently, because at some point I was a Title X training manager, and I was actually over the training of Title X clinics in Texas, New Mexico. And
explain Title X.
Title X is family planning money. And so that's government money coming from it's federal money coming from Office of Population Affairs. It's assigned to each state, and then those state health departments disperse it to clinics around their state, usually the federally qualified health clinics. And that money is specifically for family planning. So pap smears, birth control, the first, just the breast exam, not mammograms, but just, the manual, just kind of a woman's wellness exam. Now, what listeners need to know about Title X is that the language of who that money serves is women of childbearing age. That means any girl who's in puberty.
Right.
And for Planned Parenthood, 9 years old was probably the
Right.
youngest that I saw being served by Title X money. And that is without parental consent.
Well,
So
you can, yeah. I mean, a child can't consent at 9. There's no way. So obviously, if this is going on, it has to be without the parents' knowledge.
well, and what I mean is that the clinic can legally serve a 9-year-old girl
Right.
without her parents being there. That's my point. So yes, minors cannot consent to sex. So why do we have a federal program that is giving them a free service without their parents' knowledge for an activity that they cannot consent to? None of that makes any sense. And so what we're seeing, I manage the training, the clinician training for that for several states. And what Planned Parenthood would tell me at my trainings to them is that parents are a barrier to service. And I heard that over and over again over the years. And I said, what do you mean by that? And they said, well, as soon as a parent knows that their child is coming to our clinic for birth control or any of these things, because that's all they do is sexual services, then that child, we never see that child again because that parent won't let them come back to the clinic. And so they're like, so parents are a barrier to our ability to provide services. So they knew that parents were a problem for them. It was going to hit their bottom line. And so they needed to keep parents out of the way. So keeping secrets from parents is important to them. And the government helps them do it through Title X.
Right.
Because those young girls can get services without parents knowing about it. And it's all paid for by the government. And
I guess we're just listening to what you're saying. It's just shocking to me that these people, I mean, what you said earlier was you were groomed to do this. You were deconstructed. Your ideas, when they were telling you about this, you were like, ew, that's nasty and gross, right?
Yeah.
And then finally they, groom you and break you down so that you're like, oh no, it's their right to be able to have sex. It's so that's the other thing, right? Is making children adults, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trying to do right now. Get the voting age to 16, all this kind of stuff. The faster we can make children adults, the faster adults can do whatever they want to children. And I think that's basically the bottom line there. And it just shocks me that these people, when they know that parents are a barrier to services, I don't know how they can't possibly know what they're doing. I mean, they're obviously doing something wrong. They know they're doing something wrong, or parents would be in a conversation with a 9-year-old child.
Right.
Right. Well, and if I have this article from the FBI off their website about what predators do in order to groom a child for sex. And if you were to put that list next to how comprehensive sex education grooms a child, it's identical. And I talk about this on the Mind Polluters. If you haven't watched that film, go to fearlessfeatures.org and watch the Mind Polluters, where you can see a comprehensive film on comprehensive sex education, social emotional learning, which is mental health in the schools. But basically it's, gain the trust of the child, begin to slowly break down their inhibitions to talk about sex by showing them pictures, having conversations. Once they're comfortable, you move them towards sexual activity. And that's the end goal of the predator. And for Planned Parenthood and comprehensive sex education and abortion industry, it's once they're sexually active, then you want to keep them on that cycle and keep them on that cycle of getting tested and treated for diseases, getting abortions, coming back for more birth control. And it creates this cycle that allows that child to now grow up and be dependent on their services. In addition to that, we now have, we're now seeing that Planned Parenthood is also offering gender affirming care, which is really giving children chemicals to castrate themselves, to change their bodies permanently, to stunt their growth, because that's what it does, puberty blockers and all of that. plus the referrals. So you're seeing that, and that's the vicious cycle that we see in children. Yeah, that's the trailer for the movie.
Yeah, I wanted to make sure I got this out there because this looks
It's
like
a great
something.
way. Yeah, I mean, you don't hear just me on here. You hear lots of people. And what's amazing is the speakers on this film are not people who learned about comprehensive sex education and they want to tell you about it, or they learned about social emotional learning and they want to tell you about it. No, these are people who actually experienced it as a teacher, as a lawyer, as me, a comprehensive sex educator, as a nurse, an STD nurse. We have a human trafficking, a person who actually tracks down traffickers and rescues children. And you see Alex Newman there talking about the crimes of the educators. So you are actually hearing people who have had their hands in this and have discovered all these things. You see Ken Ham talking about the Christian worldview. And so it's packed with amazing information. It's not hearsay, but it's actual people who have experienced this and are working in this. And so it's a great film to show your community.
So let me ask you this: how do we? I mean, I can go back and collect it, but how do we get this? How do you find this to see it?
Oh, just right there at the that you're on IMDb.
Yeah, IMDb. This is
right.
Just the
go
teaser
to
for it.
You would want to go to fearlessfeatures.org.
Okay.
Fearlessfeatures.org, and you will see that they have several movies. They're about to come out with Dysphoria. I'm in that film as well, a very small part, just amazing people in that film to talk about dysphoria. Yeah, there we go. To talk about, what's happening with the transgender movement and how it's affecting children and families. In Wood Drive, it's actually about Klopfer. If y'all remember him, he's the abortionist in Indiana who died. And after dying, his children going through his house, and he had junked cars in his yard. They found, I don't remember, but thousands of baby remains that he had collected from his abortion clinic that he kept as trophies in his home, in cars, in trunks of cars. It was horrible. And the children were, they reported it to the police. And so that's also a movie, a documentary that's really worth watching as well. Fearless Features is a ministry of just a husband and a wife, Mark and Amber Archer, and they're doing phenomenal work. They have children of their own, strong Christian couple with an amazing testimony of their own as well. But
well, I put that in the comments for people to find, fearlessfeatures.org, because I think, Monica, you said something early on, and I'm going to bounce off of that a little bit. You said about 10 years ago, I was telling people about this and they weren't listening. Well, I mean, Julie and I know something about trying to tell people things that we're way beyond the curve, and it takes so long for people to catch up. And it can be super frustrating. And really, I think only God gives us the impetus to keep going, because if we were doing it for people, we would have quit a long time ago. Do you see anything? I think, I, over the years, as a homeschool educator, have seen a rise in homeschooling.
Yeah.
And I think COVID, even though, I'm one of those crazy tinfoil hat people, it's not gray hair, it's tinfoil, even though I'm one of those crazy tinfoil hat people that believes that, there was a specific reason for COVID, and it was for those in charge to find out how far we were going to actually follow the government and do what they suggested. But beyond that, I think during COVID, people woke up on a large scale as to what was going on in our public schools for certain, but also kind of the scales started falling off the eyes of I think, a lot of people over a lot of different things. Do you feel like that we're coming to a point in time where people are going, are you kidding me? This is really going on in schools? I mean, do you think we're there yet, or do you think we've still got a ways to go?
We still have a ways to go. We have a lot of families that don't agree with what's happening, but yet they how do I say this? they want to believe that they're protecting their own children.
Right.
And so they leave them in public schools. And although they see the problems, they don't want to speak out because they want to still have that small community where we're all going to homecoming, and we're all going to prom and
Yeah, sports is the
we're
killer.
yeah, exactly. So we
I
love the
want my kid to play
football.
football. Yeah.
Yeah, just all these things. And so people don't want to rock the boat because they don't want to let go of that feel good. What I think is what we had historically was this feel good, all American public school, eating a pickle and popcorn and watching the football game and cheering and, and I miss that too.
Well,
I miss
and
that
they've
too.
been, what John Dewey wanted to do all along was make the school the center of every community. He has been very successful at doing that. Ask any real estate person, what is the first thing people want? A strong school. And every single community sells that they have a strong school.
I'll tell you right now, every public school has these various ideologies in it.
Right.
Every single one. Why? Because it's all coming from the national government. Right. It brings a lot of money.
Right.
It is in every school. Every teacher uses social emotional learning in their class. Every teacher is asking your children about their feelings. It is happening. If my opinion is that if I were to look at an environment and I recognize that it's unhealthy, that they are abusing my child by psychologically manipulating him,
right,
then I am going to remove him from the unhealthy environment. Right. Public schools are an unhealthy environment.
Right. And even that attitude, even wanting to do that makes you the outcast in your own community, even with Christians. Yeah. Even with Christians.
It's true.
And
right.
So, Monica, I want to jump to something. I'm going to pull into the stream. This is a PowerPoint presentation that I made to the House Education Committee, had an interim study on sex education in public schools and whether it worked or not. And I was just going to flip through a couple of these slides because we found exactly what you found, that in Oklahoma, the stats of teen birth rates may be going down, but what's going up is 2 times the state rate is HIV, 4.2 times the state rate is chlamydia, 2.5 times the state rate. This is all in 15 to 19-year-olds, by the way, who are in public school, is gonorrhea. Syphilis, 2.9 times the state rate in 15 to 19 age kids in Oklahoma. So we have, you mentioned it, and this is part of the reason why I'm bringing this up. You said that Planned Parenthood were the ones that were, pushing this. So how consent is all about communicating about what you like or don't. Planned Parenthood pushes all of this consent, and they talk about abstinence, because the original thing was that I think in every school, wasn't it, Monica, that they were selling this to parents on, well, we're going to keep the teen pregnancy rate down.
Right.
So they've gotten the teen pregnancy rate down, but they have caused it by preaching against or preaching abstinence. They're also preaching other stuff like oral and anal sex and all of this. So the kids are actually spreading STDs through oral and anal sex and anything else they can do besides penetration sex. So, and parents don't understand that that's kind of what they're being taught. And we use PrEP in Oklahoma. You talked about PrEP, and you might even talk a little bit about PrEP, because this is we use personal responsibility education program. And there are 4 different ones that we use in Oklahoma, and they're all completely doing nothing but teaching kids how to have other forms of sex.
Yeah, there's not. I'm not surprised by that. Planned Parenthood, as you just saw from those slides, excellent slides. For them, there is no abstinence from sex.
Right.
If you notice, so their definition of abstinence is avoiding vaginal penetration. So, but
Right.
oral is still penetration. If you're having it with a male, anal is also still penetration. So they're basically saying abstinence is avoiding vaginal penetration in order to curb the pregnancy rates. All of that, like you said, is still spreading disease. It's still dehumanizing the child. Most kids don't even like those things. As I was teaching teenagers, this is part of my testimony of why I left. The teenagers didn't know they didn't have to have anal or oral sex or sex at all. I had a story. I had a story. Yeah, I had a story, or I do have a story of a 13-year-old girl. I was invited by Planned Parenthood. They said, we don't have time to go teach sex ed to this class. Can you fill in for us? And it was at an alternative school. And these were children, high-risk children, because they'd been kicked out of all these other schools. So this was their last chance to get an education. They were about 13 years old, and it was a co-ed class, boys and girls. So I just want you to imagine what a 13-year-old looks like. It's a child. It's a young child. And so I went in there doing sex education like I normally would, which was writing the different forms of sex on the board, a whiteboard, along with the bodily fluids that transmit disease. So I had on the board oral, vaginal, anal, and semen, vaginal secretions in blood, and started the conversation about transmission and such. And a little girl raised her hand. 13-year-old girl, beautiful, tall, slender, dark, clear skin, just gorgeous girl, braided hair all the way away from her face, just beautiful girl. And her question was not to create any kind of, reaction in the classroom. It was an honest question. And honestly, no one even reacted to her question because it was so commonplace for them. And she said, ma'am, and I'll clean up her language just because of your viewers, but it's still graphic. She said, ma'am, when I'm involved in this activity with boys, I gag. Can you teach me how to do it better? So she actually explained what she was doing in the terms, and I just cleaned that up for you guys. But it shocked me when I'll admit, it still kind of shocked me because I have a little girl in front of me asking me about a technique. I'm like, what? But I wanted her to understand what she had just asked me, because what she wasn't saying is that she didn't like it. Right. She didn't like it. And instead of saying, I don't want to do it, she's asking me for technique, or something. And so I repeated the question to her so she could fully hear and understand what she had said. And so I said, it sounds like when you're in this activity, you react this way. And it sounds like you don't like that reaction. You don't like this happening. She said, that's right. I don't like it. But maybe if you teach me how to do it better, I can start liking to do it. And I said, well, let's start there. I told the whole class, I said, guys, have you ever thought about just not doing the activity that you don't like to do? And at that moment, every child stood up, just sat up in their chair and gave me their full attention, because I had said something to them that really resonated. Wow. And I caught it. I realized it. And I said, guys, do you realize that you don't have to have oral sex? You don't have to have vaginal sex, and you don't have to have anal sex. And if you don't, and I pointed at the board behind me, if you don't, you'll never be in contact with semen, vaginal secretions, or blood from another person. And if you don't, you'll never get a disease, and you will not get pregnant. Right. And that little girl raised her hand again and said, ma'am, no one's ever told us that before. Oh. And next thing I know, these kids, huddled together and started talking about ways that they could abstain from sex. They didn't use the word abstain.
Right.
Boys and girls literally talking about ways they could avoid sex. And they had answers like this and had nothing, not like what you just saw on that slide. Planned Parenthood said that abstinence was oral and anal sex,
Correct.
masturbating, mutual masturbation,
Yes.
heavy petting, taking a bath together. That's all a bunch of, I'm sorry, BS, right?
Yeah.
These kids, these were their suggestions to each other. Hey, they all lived in government housing, by the way, Booker T. Washington and East Austin. And they said, we can go to the community center at Booker T. They have free movies and free snacks. We could just watch a movie and eat the snacks.
Wow.
Another one said, they've got basketballs. We can go to the basketball court at the park and play basketball. And the little girl who had raised her hand, she was very tall, like I said, very slender and athletic. And she said, boy, I am better at basketball than you are, and I will whip your butt all over that court. And he sheepishly just laughed and said, yeah, I know, but it'll still be fun. And they kept talking about just really wholesome ways that they could be with each other without having any kind of sexual activity. A little girl eventually pulled away from that group, came to me privately at the head of the class, and she said, it still makes me want to cry. She whispered to me, she said, I can't do what they're talking about, right? And I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I can't stop having sex, right? I said, well, why not? And she said, because I've already had sex and all the boys expect it from me. So now I can't say no.
Oh, no.
But she was saying, right? She was really wanting to hear me tell her that that was not true. And of course I told her that. I said, that's absolutely not true. I said, you can stop right now. I said, honey, you don't have to have sex ever again in your life if you don't want to, or you can just wait until you get married. But no one has the right to tell you that you have to be sexually active.
Monica, you have completely grossed me out.
She smiled, ran back to the group of kids, and started talking about ways that they could abstain from sex. Now, I'll admit, I was still a sex educator. At that moment, even though I was pretty proud of myself for like, hey, these kids don't want to have sex. Let's encourage them not to. At the same time, I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be teaching them about how to prevent, and using condoms. Like, do they fully understand that? But at the same time, this was what they needed. This is exactly what they needed. They wanted to abstain. They're doing it because the authority is telling them to do it. Children are becoming more sexually active by going through comprehensive sex education, because that's the expectation of comprehensive sex education. Jenny and Julia, if I say, get all of your friends, come over to my house, and I'm going to teach you how to make a chocolate mousse cake.
I'm there.
And I'm going to spend an hour talking about all the flour, the chocolate, the mousse, how to bake it, the ganache on top. We're going to go about all the details. I'll even teach you about how to cut it, how to serve it. What's my expectation of you and your friends after that 1 hour time together?
I can make a cake.
Right. So if I spend an hour talking to you about oral sex, anal sex, vaginal sex, getting birth control without your parents knowing, getting condoms, using dental dams, all of those things, what's my expectation of what you're going to do after that hour?
Have sex.
Yeah.
Right.
So for people to say that comprehensive sex education does not set up this expectation or pressure on children to become sexually active, they're either incredibly stupid or incredibly naive. Now, is there a way to teach children about the realities of disease and all of the things out there? Yes, but it's not like that. And it needs to be done by the parent. I am not even an advocate of sexual risk avoidance people going into the schools and teaching your children, because they are still going to introduce your children to anal sex and oral sex and all of it, even if they're going to talk about risk avoidance. This is something that belongs to the family. And this is why I created It Takes a Family. I want to dispel the myth and equip the parent, because you are, parents, the educator and the expert and the advocate in your child's life. No one will protect and love and educate your child towards truth as much as you will. And it needs to remain in the family. And what I'm seeing is that even sexual risk avoidance, which are the abstinence people, are trying to mandate sex education in the states because they want to get their piece of the pie too.
Yep.
And I know that they're saying it's because they want to help the kids. But I follow the rule of, if you're interfering with the family, if you're trying to take away from the parent what belongs to them, then you're part of the problem. And
and I'm going to go back to what you said. I'm going to jump back to what you said again a second ago, because you have so much great information. It's so hard to go, stop, I want to ask you more about this. One of the things that Julie and I and the rest of us in ROPE have been really, really big about is data collection in kids and how they take surveys. And the worst one is the CDC survey that they give to middle schoolers every other year, which is can you help me remember what the name of it is? It's very long.
Yeah, it's the YRBS.
Yes, correct. Something behavioral. Yes, the YRBS. Survey. You're exactly right.
Risk.
Yes.
It's Youth Risky Behavioral Survey, something like that. But it's the YRBS, and it's from the CDC. Yes.
Yes, and they do that. Well, you can get some of the questions online. I don't know why parents don't go out and get them, but you can get them from the CDC, and you can also get them through the Oklahoma. You can get them from the Oklahoma State Health Department. So I put numbers of these questions out when I was doing a speaking tour on something, and I had these questions out, and I was reading the questions, and of course everybody in the audience is turning green and looking like they're gonna barf, and I'm like, but this is actually in the survey. And my argument has always been desensitivity of children, exposing them to things that ruin their innocence, that give them, one of the things about any kind of first responder that we all need to pray for first responders over, they see things that none of us want to see. They see things that they can't wash their eyeballs and get rid of. They see things that run through their brain constantly because they're things that are horrifying to the human perspective. We try not to think about any of those things because it would make us scared to go out, right? So it first responders have a different coping mechanism and brain setup than the rest of us do to be able to digest and live with some of the things that they see. Well, our children don't have that. They do not have that. It's not built in. Nobody fixes that for them. I mean, we don't say, oh, hello, 4-year-old. Let me make sure that you're hardened to all the sexual nonsense that goes out there. But that's what we're doing through these surveys, and specifically what you were doing as a CSE. That's exactly what you're doing, is lowering their boundaries, ruining their innocence, putting things in their head that they can't scrub out, that makes them, like you said about that 13-year-old girl, they're cynical. They don't care about anything. It's like, how you mean we don't have to do this disgusting stuff? What in the world, other than just telling parents over and over again, don't put your kid in a public school, period. But if your kid's in a public school, you better know everything they're doing in a day.
And that's almost impossible. That's impossible. And I do have moms who have done that, where they literally policed the school every day. They'd send in opt-out letters and say, you can't talk to my child about critical race theory, critical sex theory, or critical gender theory. And it worked to the extent that some of these teachers would email them and say, hey, we're talking about this today. Is this okay? What do you want us to do? And this mom, because she was a stay-at-home mom, would literally pick up her child during that time, take him out to get ice cream or run errands or something, and then bring him back to school. Obviously, not all parents can do that. Now, fortunately, this family has decided that's ridiculous, and they're just going to homeschool their kids. And so they pulled out their children now. And I know that there are some parents who maybe cannot do that. I was a single mom for 9 years. What would I have done? I'll tell you what would I have done, because I have thought about it. Last thing I wanted to do was move back into my mom's house. But if it meant that my child would not be abused at school with these ideologies, then yes, I'm going to go live with my mother so she can care for him while I go work. I would have made that sacrifice for my child. And that's what we need to do, is make some sacrifices. We need to make some sacrifices for our children right now, because these are our children, and they do not have the mental capacity, the emotional capacity and maturity to fight these things off. They will cave.
Right.
They will cave, and they're not going to tell you about it anymore. They might complain at the beginning, but they don't want to see mom and dad coming and complaining. They don't want to hear the complaints at home every single day. They don't want to be labeled a hater at the school. They don't want their teachers to not like them and be seen as the difficult kid or the difficult family. And at some point, that child is going to cave.
Yeah.
We need to rescue our children out of that environment. And you're absolutely right about the desensitization. I'm worried about even how we are being desensitized.
Yes.
Cuties came out.
Yes.
And I just knew that everyone was shocked by cuties, but now we got used to looking at cuties, or a film like, oh, there's another film just like Cuties. And now we're not doing anything about it. Now it's the drag queens. Now it's what else is next? What else is next? And so in many ways, even we have to be careful that we're not being desensitized anymore. And yes, it may mean that you're going to give up a lot of things. You might have to give up your Netflix. Oh no. You might have to give up those cartoons that you would have rather your kids watch so you can do something else. But now they're showing all this and a rainbow everything. Well, we make sacrifices for our children. And I think it's healthier for our kids to not have so much technology. I know it is. I know it's healthier for the parents as well. Every parent's going to have to figure that out for themselves. And the three of us have said, we're the messengers. We're doing the hard work of putting it out there so that other parents who may not have the time to do or the stomach to research it, we're bringing it to you. It is frustrating. I've seen parents or moms, stay-at-home moms, who are excited to be an activist instead of just pulling their kids out of the school. I'm like, you're so busy fighting it. How about rescue your child and keep fighting it? But why are you going to drop off your child in the war zone and then fight it all day long? That's just, no, you protect your child. You protect the vulnerable. So I know I'm saying some things that are probably going to challenge people and make them upset and get them angry. But well, I'd rather you be angry at me that I'm encouraging you to take your child out of an unhealthy, very dangerous environment than be angry at me for sexualizing your child. What, so be mad at me for telling you something good. But at least I'm not sexualizing your child. And what's interesting is, I was desensitized for many years. When Planned Parenthood, they did groom me. I said, they told me all of these horror stories of 9-year-old girls coming in. It was horrible. All the things they told me about what they were finding in these children in their clinic. And my first comment was, you've convinced me. How do I help protect kids from having sex and being involved in these activities? How do you help me do that? And they immediately corrected me and said, no, dear, they're consenting. This is what they want. We're just going to teach them how to do it safer. That is their worldview. That is not protecting children. That is putting our children on the altar for Satan to do his will upon our children. And so this is an absolute battle. It is a spiritual battle, but it's also a battle that we actually can tangibly go and remove our child from that environment. And I'm encouraging you to do that now. It's totally up to you. But I have friends who have decided to sell their home and buy a less expensive home so that they could afford bringing the kids home and mom not working. I've got parents who have sold their second car and live off of one car. Is it a horrible, terrible sacrifice and adjustment? It was, but they were really grateful to protect their kids because they just saw the schools deteriorating more and more every year and watching their their children's friends becoming more and more depressed because of what they were being exposed to.
You know, we had Sam Sorbo on our show several weeks ago, and she said something that Julia and I just kind of went crazy over. She said, you know, you put these lists, you know, in pros and cons, right? So you make pros and cons lists. Well, there's a pro to staying home, here's a pro to going to public school, right? But she said it's not a pro and con list, it's a priority list. Is your priority public school or your kid?
Right.
Where's the priority?
Is it the second car or is it your kid? And schools are actually talking about sending messages. Your schools actually, since COVID, are locking parents out.
Yeah.
And, you know, parents have to jump through hoops to be able to be allowed. One of our board members, Michael, I mean, he's got kids that their parents can't come in the school to have lunch with their child.
Mm-hmm.
That is telling the children that your parents are the ones that are dangerous. I mean,
we had a mom fight that at our school, and
Right.
she really showed the superintendent that they were violating their rights. There wasn't an issue with COVID, and they were able to rectify that. But the very fact that institution is basically taking away your right to your child tells me that it's not a safe institution. It tells me that those leaders are not safe. That's what it tells me.
I call it kidnapping.
Yeah.
I don't know how you don't call it kidnapping. If they go in and you can't get them out, it's kidnapping.
Yeah.
And I don't know how we get around that. So, Monica, in closing, because we're almost over an hour here, in closing, can you just kind of round up the things that you want parents to know the most? I mean, the things that are going to really sit in the priorities. And parents, you're not doing a pro and con list here, you're doing a priority list. Can you kind of get us out of here with, you know, what you want parents to know, kind of what they can do, and, you know, run through maybe something like that?
Well, I want to encourage parents that, especially those of faith who know Christ, that you need to remember that just in the very first book of the Bible, God said he created the family. He created as male and female. He created marriage, and then he created he created the family within that marriage, and then children. Really, that is the first government and the first church, was the marriage with the children and their God. There wasn't a need for a medical expert. There wasn't a need for another teacher. There wasn't a need for even a youth pastor, not knocking youth pastors. You have everything you need within your family, especially if you are a family that depends on our Lord Jesus Christ. There isn't anything that you're missing. Do you need a little education on how to talk to your kids about relationships and sex? And maybe you want a little guidance? No problem. Contact me through It Takes a Family, or talk to your pastor. Go to your church, you know. But it's not, God never created that family unit so that other people are taking over your responsibility to your children. So do not abdicate your responsibility to your own children. You really are fully equipped, more so than anyone else, for your children. Perhaps you've adopted children. Perhaps you're a grandparent who's raising your children. God knows what is going on in your circumstances. And if he has placed those children in your care, then know that you are fully equipped and that God is equipping you to do all that you need for that child. There are options. If you're wanting to get out of public school, I highly recommend Public School Exit. I think it's .org.
Yes.
They give you great resources on how to exit public school and how to start the homeschooling. And what's great is that the resources that they recommend are not Common Core, and they're homeschool resources that are not tainted or biased by socialist or communist ideologies. And so they're very, you can trust the resources that they're suggesting. And just really don't do this on your own. Start reaching out to other parents in your community. You might do pods, you might do micro schools, you might do one day academy. There are so many people out there who are already doing this that you can glean from. I just want to emphasize that you have all within your power. And really, it's your children who are looking to you for leadership. A lot of times they're like, oh, I don't think so. My kid is rebellious. My kid rolls their eyes at me. Congratulations. They're normal children. If they're rolling their eyes at you because you've set a boundary, then you're being a great parent. You've got to set those boundaries with them. Our children are looking for us to lead. Our children are looking to us to set those safe boundaries for them because they are not capable of doing it for themselves. They need you to help them do that. And especially when it comes to technology and pornography, you've got to help your children do that. I have a story of a man who shared that he got lost. He was actually raped by a man. He never told his parents. That then started this horrible cycle of him having sex with men, meeting them online. He was destroying himself. He admitted, he was now a grown man, but he admitted he had no control. He was raped, he was being abused, but for whatever reason, he was still involved in all of it. And he was looking at pornography. And he said, now he's a grown man writing this article. And he said, when I was just a teenager and I was sitting in front of my computer, all I wanted and desired was for my father to walk in and catch me and make it stop because I couldn't do it myself. Wow. He needed his dad to be nosy. He needed his dad to get on his computer or get rid of it. He needed his dad to be a dad, to find out what was going on in his son's life and to make it stop. That was his greatest desire. And so parents, there's this cultural belief in the worldly culture says that children should have privacy in the home. They should have private phones, private this. There is no privacy when it comes to parents and their children.
No.
There were simple things, of course, when they're changing their clothes, whatever, the common sense stuff, but they need you. They need you to be the leader that you are their leader, and they need you to be doing that to help save them. They're not capable of doing it for themselves. They need you to do it for them. And so I just want to encourage parents to do this. And then not only, I think that's the first step, is lead at home. This is what I say with It Takes a Family. I want you to be equipped to lead at home, lead in your community through your church, maybe as homeschooling, whatever that looks like in your community, and leading through policy. And so we need to make sure that people, that we are creating strong policies that are holding schools accountable. The only way that a superintendent or a school or a teacher or a school board will not be doing these horrible things to our children is if they lose their money, their job, their teacher certification, their retirement, or they go to jail. It needs to hurt. It needs to hurt. They need to be punished for what they're doing. And we need policies that will make that happen. We already have God-given rights as parents to be the leaders and educators of our children. Now we need to fight and make sure that those policies are punishing those who are trying to interfere with family.
Amen. I think that's well said. And I think, what you've said today has been, sadly, we already were aware of this. It's just horrifying. The story you told, though, about the 13-year-old girl and that I don't have to have sex. I think, I think we're going to take that snippet out and show it everywhere because it bothers me so much, especially when that goes right. It dovetails right in with the presentation, the research that I did for that presentation that I did to the House Education Committee. I don't know why parents aren't getting it, but I think the one thing we do have to do and continue to do is just pray for parents, pray that the scales fall off of their eyes, pray for, Jesus to lead these people, to see what's going on. And, beyond that, to awaken the church, because if we had strong churches who were taking charge of education in educating their own children, the children in their congregation.
Right.
And parents had a place to go to do that, we would be dealing with so few of the problems that we're having right now. But, our churches have gone night. And I don't know.
I've said for years that the only solution to this problem is a mass exodus from public schools. They need to lose their funding. They need to collapse. It needs to collapse.
Yeah, we need to boycott the public school. Just get out of it altogether.
But here's the problem, Monica. How do you boycott the public schools when you have the Oklahoma legislature giving the largest investment in public education of my tax dollars that we've ever had? Every year they complain about public schools and then just carte blanche hand them, the biggest pie of the biggest part of the monetary pie of the budget. It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's I don't know how you get there. I don't know how you boycott public schools if the legislature is just going to continue to, overfund these places. So,
Yeah, I guess two things is the government and the public schools are doing, I don't know how to say this. They're doing what the church has failed to do to an extent.
Yes.
And
meaning the schools are socialist. So they're really providing all these services. Children are hungry. Children need clothes. Children need mentors. Children need mental health. Children, oh my gosh. So all these social services, right? And
nature abhors a vacuum.
The schools love it because they're getting tons and tons of money for all of this.
Yeah, lots of people.
But really, it's the community should be providing this, and the church. The scripture tells us that we are to serve the widows and the orphans. When you look at the definition, it is for widow and orphan, because I kind of wanted to see what it meant in the Greek, and it was the same thing. It was to be without a man, to be without a husband, to be without a father. And so to me, it even meant the single mother. Maybe her husband didn't die, but the man is not there doing what he has been created to do.
That's another thing.
And so we need these families to start, we need to be praying that our families will be intact. We need to be praying that God will equips us as the parents that we need to be. But we also need to be praying that churches are doing what they were created to be as well, and to serve the community instead of abdicating as well to the school that feeds the children and the school that clothes the children or provides them with counseling, when we could be providing biblical counseling from the church. And so we need to start serving from the church as well and speaking out against evil. It's not quit being worried about politics all the time while our children are dying. We need to speak against evil, and not just against evil, but we need to be preaching the goodness of Christ and helping and strengthening our families with their full submission to Christ within their family. And so there's so much that I know that we all need to do. I'm not perfect, and I'm not saying all this by having a perfect family, because I don't. But I think that that's exactly why God has led me down this path, because he's shown me this is the way that you lived. And I saw the way that it was destroying me and my son. And now with Christ, how things are better. And so it's this progression that there is no perfect family and there is no perfect church. We're not looking for perfection, but we are to be at the feet of Jesus Christ and allowing him, the perfect Father, the perfect God, to help lead us in the way that we need to be going as the leaders over our own children and within our own community. And so it's not necessarily an easy answer, but it's also a very difficult problem that we're facing. But I do believe that answer is our faith in God, strong families, and strong churches. But we have to take action.
Absolutely. Well, Monica, thank you so much for being with us today. You've just been a blessing, and, thank you for all that you're doing, and your voice. I know, the powers that be don't want you out there telling people what they taught you. And, good for you for doing that, because the only way that we win is by pulling back the curtains on the darkness and shining the light. And people need to know all of these things in order to get, to help them open their eyes and see, what's going on. So thank you, Monica,
Oh, thank
and God
you.
bless you. And
Yes.
thank you for being with us. And,
So good to
and
see you again.
Yeah. Well, Jenny and Julia, I will say that God has really humbled me in the last year or so. And you're right. It's a hard thing to be doing, to expose darkness over and over again. And you would think that I would be desensitized to a lot of it. But when I came to Christ, he made me sensitive to the evil, so it used to be that it didn't affect me, but now it does. So it affects me, as very much so. And there is a spiritual battle, especially for us who are speaking out against it and speaking for what is best, which is our life in Christ. And so I'll just ask the two of you and your listeners for prayers for your word, but also for me, because it is hard. Sometimes it is a struggle, a spiritual struggle to keep going. So your prayers are appreciated.
Thank you so much. And absolutely. And thank you again, Monica, and you have a blessed day. And thank you again for your time.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye. She was amazing. Oh my goodness. I can't even believe it. I'm going to put this up again because I want to make sure that people see her website. And then I just took it down for whatever reason. Come on, come back, please. Here is her website. So please navigate to Monica's website. And, like she said, and I want to make sure that everybody heard this. If you've got questions about sex that you want to talk to your kids about, go to her website, reach out to her. She can help you, but let's not have the communists do it for us. All right.
Also, she will come. And if you're looking for an event, your church or a group, she can come speak. So, I had her for a Friday night and a Saturday morning when she came up before, and she was just phenomenal. It kept us spellbound for sure. Just her.
Hold on a second. I also want to put up she talked about public school exit, which remember we talked about when we had Sam Sorbo on, and then when we had Pastor Paul Blair on, because he's also there's Pastor Paul right there. And I'm sure Sam Sorbo was on there someplace. So definitely use this website as well. I want to kind of hit that Fearless Features website that Monica mentioned, because she also is in the movie. And I'm not sure why it's not coming up. Hold on a second. Where did it go? It won't let me do it. I don't think anybody wants to see what's on my computer. How weird. Okay. Well, it won't let us show it, but Fearless Features, fearlessfeatures.org is where you need to go. Good job. So to see the mind polluters and the other things that Monica's done. So please make sure and avail yourself of that information. And for those of you who watch this video and the one person who said this needs to go viral, the only way it goes viral is for you to share. Yes. So make sure that you share it on your email with other people. Make sure you put it on your social media. Do what you need to do to make sure that this information gets out there. What Monica is doing is a blessing. And it gives me goosebumps, because you just know God's working through her to get this evil, disgusting nonsense away from children.
And remember to pray for Monica and for all of us that are on the front lines, for the Moms for Liberty group and all of those, all of the ones that are on the front lines. We need prayer.
Absolutely, because don't forget, propaganda is what's used, and propaganda is what gets used against those of us that are actually trying to make a difference, because They don't want us trying to make a difference. So be very discerning about the messages that you're hearing. All right. So Julia, I will see you again on Friday when we will have Tiffany Boyd from Free Your Children. Tiffany's a former public school teacher and homeschool consultant who has a worldwide weekly radio show, and it actually reaches millions. She's done some great work. She had a great interview with Alex Newman just recently on her podcast. So please make sure you tune in on Friday at 9, and we'll have Tiffany Boyd. So thanks again to Monica Cline for being on. Make sure you check out those websites, and then we'll see you again on Friday. So thanks so much for being with us.